welcome to another edition of This is Metal with Joe Lawson. Now tonight, Joe, you and I both had a great idea. We're going to be talking about Bruce Dickinson, but we're going to be talking mostly about his solo career, and because that's something that doesn't get a lot of attention these days. So I know Bruce Dickinson, you were sharing with me, is like one of your top three vocalists. So why don't you share with us how you first became a Bruce Dickinson fan? I'm sure, like a lot of us, Iron Maiden.
yeah, of course. To me, I respect and appreciate the stuff that they did with Paul Di'Anno and the other singers that came and went through the ranks of Maiden. But to me, Iron Maiden wasn't really even Iron Maiden until they got Bruce Dickinson in the band. I mean, that's his signature voice, the way that his voice fit the songs, and vice versa, was like a glove. I mean, it was a perfect match, and they really established themselves as one of the, even to this day, one of the largest metal bands out there. I mean, one of the biggest, most successful heavy metal bands ever.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I too like, of course, I gotta say, probably my all-time favorite Maiden album's got to be Number of a Beast, and for many of the reasons you just stated. I mean, first of all, 2021 marks the 40th anniversary of the band's second album, Killers, and that's kind of an interesting point in the band's career because Paul Di'Anno, who was the original singer, he was only on two Maiden albums, okay? And if you go back to those first two Maiden albums, there's much more of a there's a real heavy punk influence, because I guess, growing up in England at the time, Paul Di'Anno was heavily influenced by, the punk movement. And at that time, Maiden was still kind of trying to find their identity. And they really didn't find their identity until 1982 when they released The Number of a Beast with Bruce Dickinson. And you made a couple of very good points, which is, you talk to any Maiden fan, and most people are going to say, what we're saying here is that, I didn't really get into Maiden. I don't feel they really kind of found their sound until Number of a Beast. And it's very interesting because a lot of times when you talk about any band, everybody loves to go back to the original lineup. But Bruce Dickinson is not even the original singer, and I dare say he's more popular than the original singer.
Yeah, like I said, and that's no disrespect.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those are classic Maiden albums, and people love them, and they're good. I mean, it's a different sound, a different thumbprint, but just my opinion, my view, I mean,
I kind of agree with that.
My take on it is I'm a much bigger Dickinson fan for sure.
I mean, it's interesting to go back and listen to those first two Maiden albums because, like you said, you kind of see, okay, this is where the band got their beginning. This is what they sounded like in the beginning. And this is what they became. Now, back in like 1979, 1980, they were very big in, their homeland of England. But they really didn't break out here until, a big way until Number of a Beast. I mean, probably around 1980 when the first album was released, people are starting to really know Maiden a little more. But if you look at... even 40 years later, I mean, like we're doing today, I mean, Maiden has got a world, they've got world domination, as far as their fan base. I mean, they've toured all over the world, Russia, Mexico, places that a lot of other bands, don't even, ever get to.
Right, and Bruce Dickinson flies them there.
Yeah, and you talk about Dickinson, too. I mean, part of his appeal, because Maiden, very much like Judas Priest, is part of that British, metal thing. We think of, Sabbath, Maiden, Judas Priest. These are the British metal legends that we all know and love. And one thing all these bands have in common, I mean, Dickinson, Halford, Dio, they all got that heavy kind of powerhouse of a voice,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very commanding voice, very commanding stage presence, a very uniqueness as well.
Yeah.
And Bruce fits that category in every aspect, in my opinion. And his solo works never really got I don't feel that they got as much attention as they really deserved.
Yeah, and that's what's cool.
I know some of them were kind of experimentations that he was doing when he put out Skunk Works. That was kind of a strange album.
Yeah.
He experimented, and you can't blame him, I guess, for that, wanting to do that and drift off into different areas and try different things. But really, Accident at Birth and Chemical Wedding from his solo works are probably my two favorites.
It's kind of interesting you say that, because I'll tell you, right off top of my list, I would say my two favorite solo albums are got to be Accident of Birth and the very first one, Tattooed Millionaire. And we can get into wine a little bit, but Chemical Wedding, I was not crazy about that album when it first came out. I will tell you, over the years, I heard people like you talk about how great they thought it was. I remember getting great reviews when it came out. And I will say, I think that album I've become more of a fan of over the years. For whatever reason, I do not know. But it seems to be one of those albums that kind of has really stood the test of time.
Yeah.
It grows on you in a way. I mean, a lot of people like me, I think, had that kind of feeling when you heard like the Chemical Wedding for the first time. This is a little different, but like you said, over time it kind of grows on you, and not in a bad way.
Yeah, for me, it was just heavy and really heavy groove laden, and I'm a big fan of that. And then you put Bruce Dickinson's voice on top of it. I was like, oh hell yeah, man! I'm completely sold on this record, and. He's always been a great writer, a great lyricist, and he always writes really cool songs and really cool subject matter. So that was a great one, and so was his last one, Tyranny the Souls. That was a good record as well. I like that. Now, I guess I don't know if he's kept the same lineup as far as musicians go, but I know that he's worked with a band called Tribe of Gypsies, and those guys are some pretty talented guys, and along with Adrian Smith, and I think, of course, Roy Z had a hand in producing and maybe writing and playing on some of the stuff with Bruce as well. Yeah, in fact,
Roy Z is a very interesting character because he's a great writer, he's a great producer, he's a singer in his own right and a songwriter. I haven't listened to too many Roy Z albums, but I know people who have just really love his stuff, and it's interesting that he's played a hand in Dickinson's solo career, he's played a hand in Halford's solo career, even Judas Priest. I think he was involved in some of their albums, so he's very much like the Mutt Lange, if you will, of European rock,
Hopefully he's a lot better than Mutt Lange. Mutt Lange's the guy who chopped the balls off of Def Leppard, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you say that because, you and me were kind of talking about Def Leppard, and only thing I'm going to say to that is I agree that Def Leppard these days is much more of a pop band, but if you go back, even before Pyromania, but on those first two albums, even listen to something like Hello America, they were much more of a metal band, or even like Me and My Wine.
Yeah, their first record had some promise to it, I think. I'll give you that much. Yeah. But after that, I just was like, oh God, what the hell happened to these guys?
Yeah, and getting back to Bruce Dickinson, that's why I got to say, he really rose to prominence in Maiden. A lot of people may not realize a few people knew who Bruce Dickinson was before Iron Maiden, because he played in this band Samson that were quite well known throughout England, but they never really made it big here in America. So he was a little known. He wasn't a totally unknown guy, but Maiden really put him over the top. And the interesting thing about it is, when you're in a band like Maiden, even not the original singer, and you're actually more popular than the original singer, it's a pretty big step to leave a band like Maiden. He could have maybe stayed in Maiden and still had a solo career, but I don't really know what the decision factor was in wanting to leave Maiden, except it was a big, huge step for a guy like that,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that, it was probably scary and exciting at the same time for him, and like you mentioned, Tattooed Millionaire, I like that record. I think there was a song on that called Tears of the Dragon. I really loved that. There was an acoustic rendition of that I saw that just gave me the chills. I was like, oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, too, about him leaving Maiden. Like you said, Bruce is a great writer, but within, Iron Maiden, Steve Harris, he's kind of the band's leader. He writes a lot of it. He writes the bulk of the Iron Maiden material. The other guys kind of contribute, but I think he's the guy who has the final say on what ends up on an album, and it's kind of his vision. Even though it's a band, I think Steve Harris kind of got the final call, or that's kind of what it seems. So going solo, Bruce can kind of have more control in what he does as far as writing and how many songs he gets to write on and what winds up an album. It's much more his vision than maybe it was in Maiden.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a lot of people don't realize it, maybe people do, but, when you're in a band and it's a band situation and it's not a solo situation,
yeah,
it can be very compromising, very limiting, and especially even if it's a really good band. I mean, even if the chemistry is just firing on all cylinders and your band is just kick ass and amazing, it still gets kind of sterile, whether people admit it or not, whether they talk about it or not, and you get sometimes you feel like you're in this little box, so and if you get somebody that's kind of either not really a control freak, but maybe that has a lot of vision and a lot of creativity, and they kind of run the show, or they kind of do the bulk of the writing.
Yeah.
I can see how that would get to be feeling like, geez, I want to venture out and maybe do something myself and have a hand in the writing or the direction of the band, or stuff like that, instead of just being a hired gun or a guy that just writes lyrics and sings, or whatever. He wants to be more. He wanted to be more involved in it, and I'm glad he did. Same thing with Halford. I love Halford's solo stuff too. It was amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I'm not happy that he left Judas Priest. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't too worried about it when I first heard that Resurrection album. I'm like, oh, okay, this is cool. This is amazing.
Yeah, in fact, you just planted another idea in my head, Joe, as we're doing this. I think down the line, obviously. We've talked a little bit about Judas Priest. We had an episode on that not too long ago. It was posted, and I think we also should do an episode on Halford's solo stuff, because I'll just say this, that I like the first two Fight albums. I really love the first Fight album, probably the best, and I agree with you that some of his solo stuff was a little off, but like when he got to that Halford stuff, I really dug it. And I thought, okay, this is kind of this is at least a return to like what he does best, kind of that classic Priest sound, but which I fully understand why, even though he had the Halford band, he ended up going back to Priest, because if you're going to sound like Priest, you might as well be in the original Priest band,
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of politics to stuff and behind stuff, but I think that what he was doing had its own signature sound.
Yeah.
I think it sounded similar to Priest, but it wasn't. It wasn't like he was trying to recreate Priest. Not to me, it wasn't.
In fact, while we're on the subject of Halford, that first Halford album, Resurrection, and we're talking about Bruce Dickinson, we got to also bring up that on that, Bruce Dickinson makes
The One You Love to Hate.
Yeah. It's like a cool little duo they do on there, and I thought, wow, what an awesome combination.
Yeah, hearing that was just like, wow. There's also some footage when they toured of Jeff Tate and Dickinson and Halford singing that.
Wow.
You can find that on YouTube. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and getting back to Bruce Dickinson now, the very first album, Tattooed Millionaire, was released May 8th, 1990. And this was kind of a poppy. It's kind of interesting. It reminds me like Great British Rock. It's got some acoustic stuff on it. But like I love the title track. I love there's another song on there, kind of an acoustic track called Born in '58. It's just kind of a different sound for Bruce. Great little pop album here. And oddly enough, one of the guitar players on the album is Janet Gears, who had just like the same year joined Iron Maiden. And so kind of interesting that he went off and did this with Bruce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of the other stuff that he did, I think it's Accident at Birth and Chemical Wedding, and I'm not sure how many of the other things.
Well, I wrote down.
Smith collaborated with them on.
I got a list here. I kind of wrote down. Now, Tattooed Millionaires, I said, was released May 8th, 1990. And here's an interesting fact. Okay, it charted at number 100 on the U.S. chart, and it charted 14 in the UK. A lot of these I wrote this down because a lot of these albums. It's interesting, being that Bruce Dickinson, Iron Maiden are from England. For whatever reason, a lot of these Bruce solo albums charted higher in the United Kingdom than they did here in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean he's very popular over in Europe. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to screamforme.com, his website, and you'll see his appearances and all these different things that he's doing are all over the UK and England.
And then the next album, following Tattooed Millionaire. This is the one with the song you were talking about, Tears of a Dragon. And that album was called Balls to Picasso, released June of 1994. And again, it's kind of interesting. It charted at number 185 in the U.S., and it was number 21 in the U.K. And anybody kind of want to have a flashback, this album's it's kind of like a picture of Bruce, like in a beanie-style hat, kind of standing against like a black brick wall. I mean, a white brick wall. Kind of a solo shot, and that was a big hit off of this album, Tears of a Dragon. Now, it was kind of like a ballad, and I remember seeing on Headbangers Ball on MTV. It wasn't really a headbanging music, but it was because it was Bruce Dickinson. They played it on there. That was a big hit single from that album, and that album, that was probably the biggest song on the album. And if you compare it to Tattooed Millionaire, it's still a little bit of a pop album, but it's kind of a little bit of everything on there. And that's the one thing about all his solos. I noticed that he could have made like Tattooed Millionaire Part 2, but he's kind of gone for a different sound on each of these albums, which I think is interesting. Another reason for a Bruce Dickinson solo career.
Yeah, just to bring that to light, what you mentioned about the charts positions on that album. You got to think 94, everybody was listening to shit music like Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and all this other garbage. So rock and metal just kind of like got swept under the rug. And in Europe, it never did. It was never just swept under the rug. They got into alternative, and the grunge scene too, but they still love
their music.
People like Bruce Dickinson and what they were doing, and that's a perfect example of that.
And I think you shared with me, Joe, on a previous show that that's something you've discovered in your own musical career that like a lot of the European fans love their metal music a lot more than the American fans are, or at least a lot more supportive of it for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, Europe has always been a stronghold for metal, and it's always been just real and genuine,
Yeah.
And there's no bullshit with a lot of the people there, and they're very passionate about music. And here, there are people here that are. It's not like that there's not, but it's taken to a whole nother level in countries like Greece and different places like that. They're just like total diehard metalheads. Yeah,
and you mentioned the album Skunk Works, which this was released February 19th, 1996. And this was a little bit of an album. I think at the time Bruce was kind of... I don't know if you want to call it his grunge album, his kind of alternative album. It was, he called it Skunk Works because I remember reading interviews and hearing him talk about it at the time, saying it was much more like a band project than a solo project. But of course, because he's Bruce Dickinson, they kind of put it under a Bruce Dickinson banner. But it's called Skunk Work. It's supposed to be more of a band thing. But what I can say about this is, and I don't think I'm alone here, it's probably the most... least memorable of his solo catalog. Simple fact that like I can't even remember a single song title off of album, and it's which kind of leads me to my next point. Again, talking about the charting of this album, while it hit as high as 41 in the UK charts, it did not even chart on the U.S. Chart, which is kind of interesting. That kind of says it all right there.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of it. I mean, I was kind of like shocked, and it's like, like, what's he doing?
I mean,
now that I'm older, I realize that he was trying to do something different. He was maybe trying to work with people and give them say so, and songwriting and whatnot. Those kind of things. And so, of course, it turned out to be a different vibe, different album. Different types of music, and that's okay too, And
it's interesting you say that. In
'96, when he was doing Skunk Works, I was busy putting out my first record, Blind Rage: Blueprints to Madness.
Interesting, and I gotta say, I kind of gotta agree with you, Joe. That I remember when I went out and bought Skunk Works because, like you, I'm an Iron Maiden fan and a diehard Bruce Dickinson fan, and so I thought I'm gonna go buy anything this guy puts out. That's kind of the type of fan I was back then, and I still think I am today. But anyways, I remember, because I really dug everything on the first two solo albums, and I remember buying this and kind of feeling let down, like, wow, there's nothing that I really am digging on this album,
Right.
And Accident of Birth was kind of, again, it was a little bit of an Accident of Birth was released June 3rd, 1997, and interesting enough, this did not chart either in the U.S., but it hit number 53 in the U.K., and I gotta say, next to Tattooed Millionaire, this is probably my favorite sounding one. I mean, he's kind of finding his sound, I think, on this album. This is the album where him and Adrian Smith team back up again. Adrian Smith's been out of Iron Maiden for a number of years, and he tried to launch a solo career. He wasn't too successful with that, but he plays on this album and the Chemical Wedding, I think he played on, and that's pretty much what they did right before going back to Maiden together. These two albums, and Accident of Birth. There's one song on there, Road to Hell. I mean, I really think of all the solo albums, I think Accident of Birth probably is the most focused, because it seems to have a kind of most overall focused sound. From top to bottom, it's just a great album, great songs. I really don't think that's one album I don't really think you can go wrong with.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely one of my favorites from his solo works. And who knows what the future holds, but I'd really like to hear him do another solo record,
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe if at one point if Maiden ever decides to hang it up, I mean, he could do that. And see, I think the beauty of the Bruce Dickinson solo career is, while some of these albums didn't even chart in the U.S., I mean, they remain in print. You could go on Amazon and buy any of these albums if you wanted to. You'd still be able to get them. And see, Bruce Dickinson, he didn't have the pressure, say, of an Ozzy Osbourne having to have, you better have a hit album or we're going to drop you. And interesting enough, you go back and you listen to any of these albums, they really, for the most part, except for maybe Skunk Works, stand the test of time. And as you go back and you listen to stuff now, it doesn't really matter that they all sound so different, because I think Bruce, maybe as a solo artist, that's the beauty of, I don't have to be in Maiden. I can kind of, as a solo artist, I can do whatever the hell I want. I can be Bruce Dickinson. Yeah.
I'm sure that was part of the appeal to it. Like I said, being in a big band like Iron Maiden for so long, and having your routine, basically, and how your place and in the band, so to speak, and maybe he wanted to venture out and try something else,
Yeah, and you mentioned who were the musicians that played on. See, that's another reason I think they all sound so different, because I mean, he did not work with the same musicians. I mean, I think you check the liner notes of all these albums, they have different musicians, different band members every time. I know there's a few, I think Accident of Birth, Chemical Wedding, those are the ones that were, I think, produced by Roy Z, so his influences through out there. Adrian Smith is back with him on those two albums, and so you got that going on there, and that's maybe why those albums are a little more focused. Now the Chemical Wedding you mentioned, this is the fifth Bruce solo album. It was released July 14th, 1998. And again, this really gets me because it did not even chart in the U.S. and it was number 55 on the U.S. charts. And what's interesting about that, if you remember at that time, as I'm sure you do, Joe, especially being that you were much more of a fan of this album when it first came out, I remember reading like rave reviews and people just loving it, which is kind of amazing that it did not chart at all. But then that being said, I think a lot of that may have to do with the fact that people like me were kind of discovering it, many years later on after its official release,
Yeah, it's I don't know what it is exactly. If it was a lack of support from the
label,
companies, or who's to blame, so to speak. But it just seems like a lot of his stuff, solo-wise, just kind of got swept under the rug. And he's the singer of Iron Maiden, and
that's the one thing you'd always see on those.
I think Halford had more success with his solo career than Bruce did. But I love what he did solo-wise, and I love Iron Maiden. And same thing with Halford. I love what he does with Priest, and I love his solo stuff.
Yeah, I think part of what why Bruce wasn't as successful as a solo artist, not that the albums or the music wasn't good, but I think that has a huge part to do with what you just said, that each one of these had a different record label behind it. It's not like he was with Capitol Records or something like that on all these solo releases. He didn't have the same record company behind him, and that makes a huge difference, right there.
Yeah, and that probably tells the tale. I mean, he was probably trying to find somebody that would really put,
their muscle behind this,
their muscle behind it, and good PR, and really work the album, and help launch some things. And I mean, he did some videos, and I mean, he toured with this solo stuff too. So it's not like he didn't try.
No. And see, I think that would be the beauty of putting out even a greatest hits collection, or if he wanted to put out a new solo album, I think he could do that. Especially if you were able to do some touring behind it, because now at this point with 6 solo albums, you have a great catalog of solo stuff that you could make a pretty good set list, I would think, with.
Oh yeah, he'd have no problem coming up with material.
And then of course he could throw in an Iron Maiden tune or two if he wanted, but I don't know that he'd do that, because again, the whole point of being a solo artist, kind of let your stuff kind of shine.
Right, yeah. I mean, there would really be too much of a point in doing that, I don't think, but it would be an interesting take. I mean, I would still like to see it. I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah, and
it wouldn't bother me if I went and seen Bruce Dickinson's solo band and they whipped out a couple Iron Maiden tunes. That'd be cool.
And just going back to Iron Maiden for a minute, because I got to also make this point. I was saying, probably my all-time favorite Maiden album's got to be Number of a Beast. Just for, not that it's just a great album, but I remember as a teenager, a kid, seeing that in the record store. Yes, there used to be these places, folks, you could go and buy music. But anyway, before ever hearing an Iron Maiden song, even knowing who Iron Maiden was, I remember being in a record store and seeing the album of Number of a Beast. And I didn't even know what these guys looked like. I just seen that cool, what the hell is this? That cool looking album cover with Eddie. And I bought the album just because the album cover was so cool. And then just imagine when I get it home, man, and I hear the music off of it, wow, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting.
It was a game changer, especially back then.
And it's kind of interesting. That goes to show you just how important artwork was back in the day. Album covers and stuff, because it could have that kind of impact. You don't even know who the band is. You just see something that looks cool, and you're drawn to it. And see, that's an interesting thing about Maiden. Not just Bruce Dickinson, but the whole band is. This was not a band of pretty boys, I mean, there's not one Maiden album in which they put the band on the front cover. They always put the band's photo on the back, which is kind of interesting. So it didn't really matter what they looked like.
Yeah. They had a lot more depth and a lot more going on for them as a band than just trying to appease a certain image or a certain fashion.
Yeah.
I mean, they were an '80s band, you know, in that respect, and they did what they did, and they look like what they look like, you know. But to me, that never mattered.
No. Just a great point.
I still love the band. I still, if Iron Maiden puts something out, I still buy it.
Yeah. Well, as far as talking about the image and the look, I mean, it just kind of goes to show you that what great songwriters, what great musicians they really are, where they didn't need to have any kind of a gimmicky look, you know. It was all about the music, and I think that's the test of a really great band, you know.
Right. Also, kind of interesting to note that Bruce Dickinson's first name is actually Paul.
Wow.
So Paul replaced a Paul.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
You know.
And before we move on, Joe, I think it's also, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Chemical Wedding, I think another reason why it may have taken me and other people a while to kind of get into this album, because apparently the original idea was this was based on a book he wrote, or it was supposed to be a concept album, and I heard the initial idea was to kind of create a movie or something, or a movie script, which I guess never really came to fruition, but that was the original concept. So it's like kind of a concept album, and I think people had trouble kind of trying to figure out what is the concept here, what is the story that this is supposed to be based on.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know all the particulars involved with that, which are what you're talking about there, but it really captivated me. I was really interested in it and intrigued, and I thought they had some great hooks, some really infectious grooves on that album, and I really liked it. I was really fond of it. I still listen to it all the time today.
Yeah, you know, Tyranny the Souls, this is one I haven't really heard too much of. I got to go back and listen to this, but just to give people kind of an idea of the time frame here, this was released May 23rd, 2005. This would be his final solo album to date, and it's kind of interesting. Now, the Chemical Wedding and Accident of Birth did not chart at all in the U.S. Now, this one did. It charted the U.S., if you can believe it. So, at number 180. So, yeah, it was on the 200 chart, but, you know, I don't know what you want your album there, but it made it. And then in the U.K., it charted at number 65. Now, you mentioned kind of liking this album, too. So, what was it about this album that kind of, you know, touched you when you heard it for the first time?
Well, to me, it sounded like a natural progression
from the Chemical Wedding,
from the Chemical Wedding and Accident at Birth.
Yeah, and then you know,
so if you like either one of those, you'll probably like Tyranny too.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of interesting. After that album, they, him and Adrian Smith decided to return to Maiden, and they did that great album, Brand New World. But I tell you, what a great comeback album that was.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of interesting because then they still have Janet Gears in the band, who is the guy that came in and replaced Adrian. And I guess being that, you know, he'd played in Iron Maiden now all these years, and they were friends with him, they really didn't want to tell him that, hey, Adrian Smith's coming back, you got to leave the band. So from that point on, they've been kind of a triple threat guitar attack. So what do you think about that, like Maiden having 3 guitar players in the band? I kind of think it's a cool thing, you know, because not many...
I think live it lends itself to there's a lot of benefits to that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the overdub tracks and stuff like that, I mean, they're able to do that live now.
Yeah.
You got this huge, giant melodic force that is just awesome. I mean, and you know, if you got the budget to do it, you know, why not?
It really fattens up the sound, and I think at this point, Janet Gears kind of, I mean, he belongs there. He's been there. I mean, he's been a loyal soldier, and a lot of people may not even realize he's gotten a lot bigger since he's joined Iron Maiden. What he did previously, that he was in Ian Gillan's solo band, but a lot of people really haven't probably aware of those albums. But it's fun. It's fun if you're a Maiden fan to go back and listen to some of those albums he played on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all them guys have done different things throughout the years and collaborated with different people. It's really interesting to find out some of those connections. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And we'll get ready to wrap this up. Before we do, Joe, I can't end it before also mentioning Bruce Dickinson. Besides being a great solo artist, great frontman for Iron Maiden. I mean, this guy, he's got so many outside interests, so many other things that keeps him busy. I mean, we should probably also mention that that a few years ago that he's a cancer survivor and he beat that. He
had tongue cancer, and
could you imagine?
Actually, Dave Mustaine reached out to him.
Wow.
To get some information of what he did and how he beat it. And
well, Dave Mustaine
had a connection there.
And Dave Mustaine, as you know, recently battled that as well, and he seems to be coming out the other end, thank God. But getting back to Bruce, I mean, besides being a great singer and all that, the guy is a pilot. He learned how to fly a plane, and it's so much to the point that when Maiden goes on tour, he's got a private plane. I think Maiden's got a private plane, and he is the pilot for the band when they go touring the world. I mean, talking about being cost efficient, but what a cool thing,
Oh, absolutely.
And
he's a writer.
He's written books. He's a world class fencer.
Sword fencing.
Yeah, I mean, I read all this stuff and it's like I can't wait to see what the guy's going to do next. But I mean, he's also, if you've seen any recent pictures of him, I mean, he's quite up there in age. I think I was reading he's like 60 years old and he's let his hair turn gray and everything. But man, he's still doing it. So you gotta love him for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's sad to see some of those legends, retire or die. We lost Dio, and that was that's probably the saddest I've ever been from any singer or musician passing away. I mean, that was just like a really heavy hit to the heart. Yeah, I'm with you there, and I gotta I gotta give credit though to his wife and manager Wendy for kind of I understand that there's going to be a new Ronnie James Dio book. I think it's coming out in the next couple of weeks. I gotta look up the date, but he started before he died, and I think Wendy finished writing it with some other people, and that's going to be the bookstore. That's going to be a pretty cool thing, to have a guy kind of write his kind of life story, start it before he dies, and then his wife and other people kind of finish it for him. But that's something that would be really worth checking out, I think. Yeah, absolutely, it would. And talking about Ronnie James Dio and his cancer, they got a great cancer fund, and they're always like doing stuff to raise money for it in the name of Dio. So if Ronnie had to die, at least they're raising money in his name for a good cause, Yeah, that's cool. And talking about Ronnie James Dio for a minute too. I mean, I think the guy was, he was much older than people even realize. I think he was like, 60 something. And you look at Ronnie, and you never think, you don't think of him as a senior citizen, but man, he was rocking and rolling and doing his thing all the way till the end. Yeah, like a true trooper. Yeah, well, Joe. It sounds like you've had a busy day. So, unless there's anything else you'd like to say, I guess the next time we do this next week, we're planning to do have a discussion on the 30th anniversary of Slave to the Grind, which I know is one of your favorite Skid Row albums. And then we're also going to talk about the fact that Johnny Solinger, who was the original guy that replaced Sebastian Bach, he recently passed away. So I'd like to do a little tribute to him and talk a little bit about him. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, well, you take care, Joe. And just, I don't know if you know, but our latest episode is up. Is a tribute we did to Leslie West. Now, a lot of people may think Leslie's like